and welcome to the Leading Lives podcast from Hallmark Productions here at the Login in Dorset. Now, there can't be many things that are worse in life than seeing an ill child. One such charity that deals with looking after children in the very worst circumstances is Julia's House. With me today is Martin Edwards, Chief Executive. Martin, hello and welcome. Thanks for coming in.
Hello, Chris.
Let's start by you telling me, what is Julia's House all about?
We're a children's hospice. We look after children all over Dorset and Wiltshire in the West Country of England, and we produce national research as well. And we look after children with very serious, what we call life-limiting or life-threatening conditions. That means that they're not expected to live long lives. And our role is to be there not just when they require end-of-life care, but from diagnosis onwards. So if that child lives to be 15 before they pass away, then it's not just about the last few weeks of life, it's about supporting the child and the family throughout their lives. Because these parents are exhausted looking after their child round the clock. Siblings may not get as much of mum or dad's attention. There's the terrific concern about the condition deteriorating, and then a family enters bereavement. So there's a need for support throughout the journey of the child's life from the moment they're diagnosed with that life-shortening condition. That's what hospice care really is about.
Why is it named Julia's House?
We were named after a nurse. A lot of children's hospices are named after children. But Julia was a nurse originally from Wolverhampton, and she moved down here to Dorset to work on a children's ward. And she devoted her life to these children. And towards the end of her career, she contracted cancer herself. And it became incurable. And she was looked after by an adult hospice. And she suddenly realised how much extra hospice care could provide for these children that she'd been working with through the NHS all her life. And so she said, we have got to create a children's hospice here. But her illness took its hold too quickly, and she was unable to found the charity, but a good friend of hers did. So a man called Mike Wise, who was a local businessman, said, I will set it up and I will name it after you. And she passed away shortly after that. But Mike was our founder, and he was subsequently awarded the MBE for charitable services. I worked alongside him for 15 years. He was a wonderful man. And when he and his fellow founding trustees had raised the money to build the hospice, they brought me on board to design, open the place, and to grow the charity. And we asked Julia's 2 grown-up daughters to come and cut the ribbon on the hospice building.
So you've been there a long time yourself, and what motivated you to get on board in the first place?
Well, I wanted to become a charity worker in the Live Aid famine, the Ethiopian famine of the 1980s. As a teenager, I couldn't bear seeing these images on screen of children starving without doing something about it. So I set up a group at university and spent 3 years fundraising and raised a lot of money for famine relief in East Africa. And the other formative thing that happened around that time was that I had a brain hemorrhage. I was 18 at the time, and it was a very serious condition. It could have been life-threatening, and I had to go through brain surgery for that. And there was a long period of recovery afterwards, probably 6 months physical and about 4 or 5 years of mental recovery. And it's given me just a little bit of insight into the challenges faced by people with really, really serious conditions. The conditions that we care for at Julia's House are much more serious than that. But it just gave me a little insight into how worrying it is for the family, how much it affects your life, how much it changes you as well when you're going through an enormous amount of strain, and when you're going through ups and downs physically and through operations and things like that. And I think that just, together, the two things, raising a lot of money for family relief and then myself being very affected, just made me realize there was more to life than becoming, dare I say it, a lawyer. I was reading law at university. I don't want to put off any lawyers, many of whom I'm sure will be listening to this podcast, but I felt that there was a bigger world out there, and I wanted to be a part of trying to change it.
I originally started out as a career in banking and gave that all up to move into media.
You don't like to talk about it now.
That's it.
No.
Yeah. Not that this is about me in any way, but I'm actually going to be a granddad for the first time next month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So babies are in my thoughts right now, and you provide neonatal care as well, don't you, at Julia's house? So.
Yeah, some of the children will live very short lives. I mean, these days, with advances in medical science, more infants whose life is under severe threat when they're born will survive and grow into teenagers or into young adults before their condition takes its final course. But yes, some of them will live very young lives. Sometimes that child will never leave hospital, so they might not come to a hospice. But if they're referred to us, then our nurses or support workers can go and support the family in hospital. And if their child does pass away after a few hours or a few days, that family will come into our bereavement support, and we can support families for up to 5 years afterwards, so that they're then embraced by a whole support network to try to help them to come to terms with what has gone on in their lives.
You cater for people up to the age of 18. What happens to them when they reach 18?
They would then go on to adult services, and there aren't enough of them. It's what we call transition. So when a teenager is transitioning into adulthood, so we will work with that family for a couple of years beforehand to try to identify what services are there that can help fill that gap. We wish that we could look after every child or young person if they live until 25 or 30, but we just don't have the resources. And so we are a hospice for infants, children, and teenagers up to 18.
Is the care just in Dorset? But I think you go further afield, don't you?
Yes, we do. So when I first joined, it was a Dorset charity, and that was the job. And after a few years, I just felt that we could do more. And I recommended to our trustees that we create a second children's hospice. We looked at all of the surrounding counties, and we identified Wiltshire as an area that didn't have these kind of services, because we also look after children in their own homes as well as in the hospice. It's a very local service. And so we went off and raised the money, and a key player in that was the film director, Guy Ritchie. Guy had a house on the Dorset Wiltshire border, and we got to know him, and he agreed to help us raise the money, and he and his friends raised 2/3 of the money to build the Wiltshire Children's Hospice. They included David Beckham, Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. played a big part by raffling off a chance to meet him at the world premiere of the second Avengers movie. And we raffled this online, and it raised over £1 million. So between them, they raised most of that money and accelerated our plans. I think we could have got there, but it would have taken us a lot longer. So it brought those plans forward, probably by 7 or 8 years, I would say.
You've also got a lot of other well-known patrons, haven't you?
Martin Clunes has probably met more of the families than anyone else. He's very, very engaged in the service. He lives in West Dorset. And they're not always the occasions that are publicised. Sometimes it might be just meeting a family or inviting one of the families out to his farm. Things like that can go on behind the scenes. We have Rupert Everett and Nigel Havers, the actors. They're both patrons as well. Harry Redknapp was our first patron, and he was the one that helped Julia's house get talked about and on the map when nobody had heard of us, and Harry's still involved today.
You got royalty as well, haven't you?
The Sarah Duchess of York is one of our patrons. Yes, there's a funny story that you've heard the phrase elevator pitch. Well, I found myself in a lift in an elevator with Sarah Duchess of York, so I did a literal elevator pitch on her. And in the, whatever, 20 seconds in between the doors closing and reaching the floor that she got out at, I managed to persuade her to come and visit our hospice. And when she did, she was terrific with the mothers. I've never seen anybody connect so naturally with the mothers of the children. And she was wonderful, and she agreed to be a patron as well. So yes, that was my literal elevator pitch.
Well, I'm glad it was successful. Facing up to a child's illness and their impending death must be incredibly difficult for parents, and I imagine that they have this sort of they don't want to face up to it. So how do you get them on board and get them through your doors? Because it's like them almost admitting we've got a problem here, isn't it? And I think they want to put it to the back of their minds.
So the referrals come from the health professionals that are already around them. So that might be a consultant doctor, or it might be a nurse on a ward in a hospital. And you're right, it is an obstacle, because that word hospice, a lot of people associate it with imminent death.
Yeah.
And it can be, but it isn't necessarily. And in fact, most of the children in our care, we're going to see for a period of months or years before they pass away. But for that reason, it can take families some time, and that's why you need to work with your with nurses and doctors out there in the health service to help them to understand what we can do, so that they can explain that then, and help a family to cross the threshold and come and see. Just come and see what goes on in here. And people always assume that a children's hospice is a miserable place, but the thing is, children pick up on atmospheres. And if it's a miserable place, they won't want to come back. The children are coming regularly. Long before the end of their lives, they'll come for regular respite stays. And kids want to play, and they want to sing and laugh and do arts and crafts and dance and all those kind of things. And it's our job to help them. So probably the sound you'll most hear in Julia's house is laughter echoing down the corridors. There will be days when there are tears as well, but there are a lot more happy days.
You make it fun for them, don't you?
Yes. And there's nothing better than seeing a child's face light up with joy, or in fits of giggles, or singing on the karaoke machine with a couple of our nurses, or things like that. I can remember we threw a party for one child, and she said to me, "Martin, can you give me a hug?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And she was in a wheelchair. So I got down on one knee to give her a hug, and she gave me a hug with one arm, and she dunked a huge pot of glitter all over me with the other. And I was picking glitter out of me for days afterwards. And, it's things like that. It's having water fights in the garden. It's the music festival week, which we call JH Rocks, Julia's House Rocks, with different musical acts coming in every day. It's things like that. And you realise that life is all in the moments. It's the moments of joy that you see or share. That's what makes life really meaningful.
Yeah. And obviously there must be a huge demand on the charity's time. How do you apportion time to families?
Well, there are national measures for whether a child's condition is life-shortening. So that handles the criteria. And then every family gets a certain amount of respite hours from us, but we will also provide emergency care and family support. And family support has become the big thing because of the pressures that these families are facing. If you're awake at night, every night, because your child needs care every couple of hours, just imagine the impact that has on a parent couple. And exhaustion very, very quickly sets in. So we're here to take pressure off them by looking after their child for respite stays, by helping mum and dad with emergency assistance, maybe writing a financial assistance grant application for them, or helping them to acquire a special wheelchair for their child, or helping the sibling with counselling sessions to help them come to terms with all of these things that go on in their family. There's one sibling that I know of who had to walk into a GP surgery aged 11 or 12 and get the attention of the staff, because mum was out in the car park trying to deal with a life-threatening fit for her child. And she had to go in on her own and negotiate that situation and get emergency assistance. And you've got young siblings opening the doors to ambulances in the middle of the night. They have to grow up really fast, and also they are in the background, the siblings, because
Yeah.
of the sheer amount of emergencies and time that has to be spent with the ill child. We're here to say, you matter too. So we give them time, we give them one-to-one time. We have sibling workers take them out for walks and talks, or to coffee shops, or for outings, and those kind of things, as one sibling said, gave me back my childhood.
Is care just limited to people who can come to you, or do you go out in the community?
It's a home care service as well. We will send nurses or carers to your door, broadly speaking, at times when you want it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important, because some of these children, it's very difficult to transport them because their health is so fragile, or because they have so much medical equipment. And just getting out of the house, anybody who's got a newborn baby knows that just getting out of the house is a big obstacle, right? Getting everything together. It's 10 times more so with a child with a complex medical condition. And so our nurses and carers will come to your door and say, we'll take the child off your hands now. You go upstairs and sleep, or go out shopping, or spend time with your partner or with your other children. And it's that time back that just gives families the strength to carry on.
Now, funding all of this is always going to be a problem. There's massive calls on everybody's charitable donations. How do you go about fundraising? Give me a few of the things that you do.
Well, it's an industry. I probably spend more than half of my time fundraising in some shape or other. We've got 14 shops which do very well across our region. We've got a weekly lottery. We have 8,000 players playing in our weekly lottery.
There's some quite good prizes on that.
Yes,
well.
yes, that's right. Yeah, buy your tickets now. We have events. We stage auctions. We apply to trusts and foundations. We have people who regularly give, and I think most importantly, we have people who give in their wills as well. People who remember us in their will, and a quarter of the children, 1 in 4 children in our care, is supported by people leaving us gifts in their wills.
I know this one's going to get me tongue-tied. I've been trying to practice this before you came in. What is the Great Tail Trail?
The Great Tail Trail is a sculpture trail which will be on the seafront and in the parks of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole next spring from April to June. There'll be 40 giant-sized mermaid tail sculptures and several miniature ones as well, all of which will be painted in a kaleidoscope of different patterns. So every one will be completely different. And it's a public art trail. So people will be able to go round the Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole area, see some beautiful landscape and some wonderful seascapes, and tick off these sculptures as they go around. And then at the end of that, the mermaid tail sculptures will be auctioned off for Julia's house. And we call them mermaid tails because the end-of-life care room in our hospice is called our mermaid room. And it's the room where we provide support to a child in the very last few hours and days of their life, and then support the family afterwards. So it was a way of celebrating the seaside down here on the south coast, but also it resonates back to what we are.
Continuing the aquatic theme, there's starfish as well. Tell me about that.
Yes, so Starfish is a collaboration between Children's Hospice Care and local NHS workers, and it's about enabling families to have the choice of place of care when their child passes away, and to have the best possible collaboration between the different staff with different skills. So you've got NHS and Children's Hospice Care working in partnership. One mum said to me recently, and she said it to some Department of Health officials as well, when my child dies, I want to know that he's going to be looked after by staff who know him, and that we're going to be supported by staff who know us. I don't want to go to the next door county, to somewhere where we're not known. I want to know that everybody understands my child, and that choice is the last choice I will have in my child's life. And for her, she didn't want that care to be at home. She didn't want her home to be associated with a place where their child dies. So she wants it to be in Julia's house. And a collaboration between NHS and children's hospices, when it really works, gives the best possible collaboration, the best possible choice to a parent. It means that they can choose where their child goes, and then the staff work together to pool their expertise and knowledge to give that child the best care.
What happens when the worst has sadly happened? It's inevitable, I suppose. But do you keep in touch with the families afterwards for a while?
Yes, in many ways. So each child has a specific nurse who has supported them most through their child's life. And that Julia's House nurse will continue to visit them at home for keeping in touch conversations to see how they are. And I think the fact that they knew their child is really helpful. We can also provide bereavement counselling, but if you think about it, a counsellor has never known the person who was alive, or almost never. Whereas if a nurse did know that child, then I think the parent can talk to them in different ways about that child's life. And I think it's very important to keep memories alive and to continue to talk about those who have passed, which becomes harder for parents over the years because they will meet more and more people who didn't know their child. Yeah. And they'll have difficult choices, even answering the question, how many children do you have? If they have 2 surviving children, well, do I say 2? Or do I say, well, I had 3 children, but one of them has died. Am I going to drop that into my first conversation, meeting somebody? I think it's really important to continue to talk about and honour and remember the lives of those who are no longer with us.
It would be easy to forget the impact that dealing with death all the time, all around them, on your staff. Is burnout a problem?
It is a constant risk in acute healthcare. And the best way around it is to be a really understanding, supportive, kind group of colleagues, so that we're all supporting each other all the time. We're all looking out for who's struggling all of the time. We're always very respectful of the fact that it's not our child or our family member who is passing away. But when you're in that line of work, you'll see it again and again and again. And I do think it's important to be really connected to the families. You know, running a healthcare service, if you're at the front line, obviously you're going to be meeting families all day long. If you're a manager in a healthcare service, it's not your job to sit behind a desk all the time. It's your job to get out there and see what the service is like, to observe it, to talk with the families about what their experience of that service is like, positive or negative, and learn from that all the time. So, for example, I host our annual Remembering Day, which is a gathering of bereaved families in the hospice garden. And I make sure I speak with all the families there. I give the remembrance speech acknowledging the importance of every child's life and how much that has continued to inspire everybody who knew that child. And in that sense, their legacy continues to affect the world and improve the world. And I just think it's important to be very close to how the service is received by the families. But it can take a lot from you. And that's why we have to be the kindest workplace imaginable. One of my big passions is to make sure that we are a kind, supportive, intuitive employer, because so many of these nurses have worked other places where the system was too big. You know, the NHS is a very, very big, bureaucratic, complex system, and sometimes it feels like staff succeed in spite of management rather than because of it. I want our staff to succeed because we're all in it together.
Do you have a problem with recruitment? I know the NHS has massive issues. What about yourselves?
There is a national shortage of nurses, and particularly children's nurses. So if any teenager is wondering what to do with their lives and where they might find gainful employment, you will never be out of work as a children's nurse. But there's a shortage now of carers as well. It's getting harder and harder to recruit carers. We have to be better at recruitment, but we have to be great at hanging on to people when they're there. And that's the thing that I care about so much. It's making sure our staff feel that their employer cares about them and is really trying to do the best thing by them at all times.
We see on TV nowadays more and more adverts for charities, asking if you're prepared to donate. You see them every day. And there's been a lot of calls on everybody's money because of the financial crisis, energy costs, etc. How have things affected you?
It's been extremely tough for the whole charity sector, and including for hospices. So our costs have gone up by about a quarter over the last 3 years, and although our income has risen a little, it hasn't risen as much of that. So you've got a gap, and most charities are in substantial deficit. Nearly all hospices, including us, are, and that can't be sustained. And we are making the case to government to say hospice care relieves pressure on the NHS. Where would these patients go if there weren't hospice beds available? They would have to be cared for. They would end up being in hospital. And governments always talk about wanting to relieve pressure on hospitals and to treat patients closer to where they live in the community. In palliative care, that's hospice care, whether it takes place in a building or in people's own homes.
The government, of course, haven't done you any favours in their recent budget. How is the rise in employers' NI and to some extent the minimum wage as well, how is that going to affect you as a charity?
I can only think that the Chancellor has not thought this through, that the rise in national insurance tax on employers is sweeping up the whole of the charity sector. It's sweeping up healthcare providers like hospices. So for us, the extra cost from the budget of that tax rise is £242,000 a year, nearly £250,000 a year extra that we're somehow magically expected to find. What's going to happen if hospices can't find that extra funds? It's not going to come from the money that's been given to the health service. That won't reach hospices. If hospice beds have to close, then there's going to be much more pressure on the NHS. So it's a self-harming policy that hasn't been thought through. The charities like hospices that work hand in glove with the NHS, we're co-designing strategies for palliative care. We're working, like on the Starfish project, to provide the best possible care to parents and children at the end of their lives. If they suddenly have to cut back services because the government hasn't thought through that a tax net has dragged hospices into its net, then the effects on the NHS are going to be enormous. It's got to be reversed now, and we're working very hard to try to get politicians behind that push.
Yeah, I was going to come on to that, but before I do, the Chancellor would counteract that by saying, well, she's given £22 billion extra to the NHS. Does that go far enough?
Well, it depends who it reaches, doesn't it? Unless it's specifically earmarked for hospice care, it won't reach hospices. So that does not answer the question, how are hospices supposed to find this extra money, and what will happen if we don't? I mean, we have an ageing population, right? There are always advances in medical science that need more money spent behind it. So a lot of that money will be swallowed up by those two demands, a greater population and advances in science. It certainly isn't the answer to the problem that we've just been landed in the world of hospices by this enormous tax rise.
I know, you have to be careful what you say. Those things don't apply to me, thankfully. And, I can say that I think that the stock answer of giving 22 billion to the NHS is just really paving the way for the Chancellor to deflect blame away from her when everything goes wrong. But that's just my view, and wonder if you all agree. It's not just the NI, although that obviously is massive, because there's all sorts of employment legislation coming down the line as well that's going to change. And I know that you want to look after your staff, but it's just more difficulties as well added to the list, isn't it? With all the rules that are going to be changing.
There are bits and pieces in the budget and the employment legislation which will cost all employers more money, but I think in isolation there are reasons for why any of those should happen. I don't think the national insurance rise, which dwarfs the cost of all of the rest of those things, has been thought through. If this isn't reversed quickly, this is a train wreck that's coming down the line on the 1st of April.
What representations are you making to government to get this changed?
I've written to many MPs about this. We are mobilising the public to write to their MPs about it. If you care about hospice care, if you know somebody who's been looked after well in a hospice, understand that future services are not guaranteed for the next generation of patients, for the next generation of children in our care. And we need this tax rise to be reversed. So at the moment, it's about political lobbying.
I hope our MPs in Dorset get to see this, even just this snippet. I'm going to send to them because I can't believe what they're doing. Let's move on to the job. I mean, I guess from some of the things you said, it's the best job in the world, but obviously it's also the worst as well, isn't it?
I feel very privileged to do the work that I do, and the words you hear most from our staff are lucky and privileged. We feel privileged that the families who are under so much stress in their lives let us into their lives and let us help them, including in their own homes, and follow their journeys and wrap our arms around them for months or years. It's a very unique position to be supporting families over that long period of time through all of the roller coaster of their child's condition, and then including at the end as well. It's very intense work. I've never known a job that has so many highs and so many lows. I think the worst thing is when children are dying in your care and you're also talking to people who don't care. That's the worst juxtaposition, when on the one hand you can see the fantastic care that's going on and you can see what's happening at the very end of a child's life, and then you talk to somebody about funding and they're actively standing in your way. That's the worst thing, because you think if you could just come here and see what we're doing, then surely the light bulb would go on in your head and you'd start helping us and stop being such an obstruction.
So I guess that you'll be extending that invitation to our local MP, for example, and others as well.
And many of the local MPs have been very, very good to us, and they are pushing hard for us on this campaign. Ironically, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves visited a hospice, I think it was shortly after the election, in her own constituency, and came away incredibly impressed by all of the care and saying how wonderful and we must find a better settlement. And then 4 months later in the budget, wallop, here's a great big tax bill for you guys.
True politicians' actions, that. Yeah. If there was one thing you could change about Julia's house, I know you can't save children, but if there's one thing that you could change, what would it be?
Well, I'd like to be able to employ twice as many nurses and help twice as many children. Yeah. So far, we haven't had to turn a child away for financial reasons, but that time, as I say, it can't be guaranteed in future. I'd like us to give even more support to families, more family support workers, more counselling support to families, to look more at the damage that's done around the edges in family life of having a child with a complex condition for year after year. We did some research on this. We led some national research into the impact of respite breaks, and it showed that families where the parents are in stable relationships, they are getting substantially more respite care, more breaks, than parents who are at risk of splitting up. And I would want us and the state to be investing more in respite breaks and giving families more hours off from looking after their child, because it will help the parents to spend more time together and to spend more time with their other children. So we are providing some of that but we would like to provide more, or we would like the state to provide a lot more. It's in nobody's interest to wait for more of these families to split up under the strain.
It's clear, your passion for this, and I can't believe the pain it would cause you if you had to say to a family with a dying child, "We can't help you." I mean, that's a scandalous situation for you to have to find yourself in, isn't it?
I would like to think that we would always prioritize emergency end-of-life care, and that we could take that referral, but what it would mean is that we would have to trim back on other things like respite care or family support for other families temporarily, while we focus on the intense nursing needs of that particular child who's near the end of their life. And that's how we do it. If we suddenly need 3 times as many nurses in order to provide care for 1 or 2 children who are at end of life, it means we need to pull resources away from the respite care temporarily. So I hope we never have to say, your child's at end of life and we can't help you. But the funding model for hospices isn't working. We have to raise 92% of our money. You have to sell 43,000 blouses in a charity shop to fund a hospice bed for a year. This is intense acute care. It doesn't come cheap. And if you only get 8% of your money from government, as is the case with Julia's House, where is the safety net? And this is a service that's working hand in glove with the NHS and relieving pressure from it. And any other hospice in the country would tell you the same sort of thing. There needs to be a better model of funding. In Scotland, children's hospices care costs are 50% funded by the government. And I think that's a fair solution. And they fund the other 50% plus the costs of their fundraising.
How is it funded across Europe?
Well, there isn't really hospice care across Europe or the rest of the world. The UK is the leading provider. So we established the first children's hospice in 1982. First adult hospice as well in the world, and that model is only very, very slowly being replicated. So I think there's still only 3 hospices in the whole of the United States, for example. There's a fledgling charity which is establishing hospice care in Greece and parts of Southeast Europe, and moving up towards Scandinavia as well, but very, very small institutions.
So we've got a world-leading service, and we're simply trying to throw it away. Really, the people that are in power are not helping you, are they?
If you've got a world-leading service, you should treasure it and nurture it. And if you're really wise, try and spread that model. I've done some mentoring of some small children's palliative care charities in the United States, one in Florida and one in Seattle. But I'm just one person, right? Why don't we say, actually, we are the world leaders in palliative care. Let's help establish how we can accelerate this excellent care around the world.
Looking at the future of Julia's House, I mean, if we'd have had this conversation a few months ago, I think your answer would have been very different. You just had a hand grenade lobbed into your planning. But how are you planning for the future in the best way that you can?
Cautiously and with a lot of uncertainty. I think 5 years ago, I would have said to you that we would continue expanding. Now we're looking at contracting. Potentially, you've got to balance your books, haven't you?
Yeah.
If we don't get substantial extra help from the government, or if they don't unpick the hand grenade that they've just rolled into the nest, then hospices will have to reduce their services at some point. And it'll be at different times for different hospices, depending on where their financial situation is. But it's coming down the line. So at the moment, we're having to look over the next 6 to 12 months and say, what do we need to do in order to get through that, rather than look at the next 5 to 10 years with the kind of confidence that we might have done in the past.
We're coming to the end of the podcast now, and so let's try and end this on a high. Give me one of the things that's brightened your day in the past couple of weeks? So perhaps one of the things that a child's done, apart from the glitter. Come on, give me something else.
We have been looking after a child who is near the end of life care, and through a contact, we established what his likes and passions and interests were, and through a contact, we have been able to get a celebrity message from a celebrity that he really loved and looked up to, and he replayed it time and time and time again. And I thought that was a lovely little thing. Just occasionally, there can be moments of magic like that, where somebody who means a lot to these children's lives will brighten up their life. And we were able to do that. I won't say who it is because it's something we've just arranged discreetly.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of good out there in this world. And there are a lot of people who are willing to do things quietly and behind the scenes just to try to lighten up these children's lives.
Tell me again how people can get in touch with Julia's House and pledge their support.
Well, have a look at our website, which is juliushouse.org. There's an opportunity to visit our shops. There are donation buttons on the website. You can play our weekly lottery. You can remember us in your will, which is one of the most influential things of all to do. I say to everybody, whenever I'm giving talks, remember local charities in your will, whichever local charities they are. That's the thing that you can do that will leave the biggest legacy behind after your own life. We've been very fortunate to live relatively normal lifespans. We don't know how much longer there will be, but we've done pretty well up to now, haven't we?
Yeah.
There are plenty who haven't. I've seen so many children pass away at a very young age. We lost a colleague earlier this year who was younger than me. Those of us who have been blessed with a normal lifespan, let's make the most of it and make sure that we can leave the world a better place.
Martin, I'm truly humbled to have had you here as a guest today, and I'm in awe of the work that you and your team do. It's incredible. Thanks very much again for coming in.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Now, next week on our podcast here at the Login, we're going to be joined by a Premier League football commentator who I've known ever since he first started out, actually. He's got a great story, and we're going to have some great anecdotes and a bit of fun as well. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you and goodbye.